So friends, Donald Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, just suffered a significant defeat in his criminal case in Arizona, where he is indicted as part of a conspiracy to try to overturn the 2020 presidential election. And this defeat is pretty bad for Mark Meadows, but it may also prove to be extremely damaging to Donald Trump in his prosecution in Washington, D.C. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So friends, Mark Meadows, Donald Trump's former chief of staff. You already know that he's criminally indicted in Georgia for being part of Donald Trump's criminal conspiracy to try to overturn the election results in Georgia. He is also indicted in Arizona for similar conduct. He's an unindicted co-conspirator thus far out in Michigan. And Mark Meadows is not yet indicted in Donald Trump's federal criminal case in Washington, D.C. Stay tuned on that front. You may remember that down in Georgia, after Mark Meadows got indicted by the state court prosecutors, he tried to move, or more precisely, remove his case from state court, where it's being prosecuted, to federal court, claiming that everything I did, with and for and on behalf of Donald Trump, all the official duties of a chief of staff to the president, so I can't be prosecuted in state court. The case should be removed to federal court. And Mark Meadows lost that litigation down in Georgia, and he's in the process of trying to appeal it. Well, he tried to make the same claim in Arizona. And in a brand new ruling by a federal judge in Arizona, Mark Meadows just lost again. And his case will remain in Arizona state court rather than being removed to federal court. So you may be asking yourself, well, okay, what's the big deal? Mark Meadows just keeps losing, and all of these losses take Mark Meadows one step closer to being prosecuted in Georgia, in Arizona. So why is this an important legal development? Well, the reason this matters beyond Mark Meadows is because of what the federal court judge in Arizona said in his ruling, rejecting Mark Meadows' claim that this was all part of the official duties of a chief of staff to the president. That federal court judge, John Tucci, issued a 15-page ruling, and some of what he said may become relevant and may actually hurt Donald Trump in his federal litigation in Washington, D.C. And we'll talk about how that is in a minute, but let's start with the new reporting. This from Politico. Headline, Mark Meadows loses bid to transfer Arizona election case to federal court. And that article begins, a federal judge on Monday rejected an effort by former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows to contend that he was performing his official duties with his efforts to help Donald Trump remain in power despite losing the 2020 election. U.S. District Judge John Tucci's ruling is a rebuke of Meadows' effort to derail the criminal case brought by Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays, who charged the former Trump aide and more than a dozen others with conspiring to subvert the 2020 election. Trump is described as an unindicted co-conspirator in the Arizona state case. Prosecutors charged Meadows with helping Trump implement a scheme to deliver slates of fraudulent presidential electors to Congress after the 2020 election from several states where Joe Biden won the popular vote. The effort was part of a wide-ranging plan by the former president to remain in power despite losing the election. So friends, let's have a look at just a little bit of Arizona federal court judge John Tucci's ruling rejecting Mark Meadows' attempt to move his case from Arizona State Court to federal court. In the case of the state of Arizona plaintiff versus Mark Meadows defendant, Judge Tucci sets out, really what this Arizona case is all about. He says that the individuals charged, the defendants, charged by the state of Arizona, include the 11 individuals who acted as so-called fake electors, corresponding to the 11 votes allotted to Arizona in the Electoral College, as well as 7 individuals who allegedly orchestrated and supported the scheme behind the scenes. Among these behind-the-scenes indictees is Mark Meadows, who served as President Trump's chief of staff from 2020 through 2021 and at all times relevant to this case. In particular, the state alleges that Mark Meadows worked with members of the Trump campaign to coordinate and implement the false Republican electors' votes in Arizona and was involved in the many efforts to keep Trump in power despite his defeat at the polls. And friends, here's what the whole removal issue really boils down to. Were the acts for which Mark Meadows was indicted part of Mr. Meadows' official duties or not? That is the central question, the dispositive question, the controlling question. Because if everything Mark Meadows did was just part of the official duties of the chief of staff, well, then maybe the case is more properly handled in federal court rather than state court. Here is how Mark Meadows characterized his responsibilities as chief of staff. Mr. Meadows frames the chief of staff's role as essentially the gatekeeper who controls access to the president, the filter for the president's time and attention, and the key official in charge of facilitating communication to and from the president. So friends, there's Mark Meadows saying, I'm just kind of a messenger. I'm just an errand boy. I just facilitate the flow of information to and from the president. I didn't do anything wrong. I just passed messages. Yeah, well, Judge Tucci said, you didn't just pass messages to and from the president. That's not what you're indicted for. And here's what Judge Tucci said about Mark Meadows' claim that, he's just a messenger boy. Mr. Meadows has not so much removed the state's indictment as rewritten it, contrary to Mr. Meadows' assertions that he's just the messenger boy. The state has not indicted Mr. Meadows for merely facilitating communications to and from the president or for simply staying abreast of campaign goings-on. Instead, the state of Arizona has indicted Mr. Meadows for allegedly orchestrating and participating in an illegal electioneering scheme. And, Judge Tucci continues, that conduct is unrelated to Mr. Meadows' official duties. Therefore, because the court concludes that the conduct charged in the state's prosecution does not relate to Mr. Meadows' color of former office, in other words, his official duties, Mark Meadows loses and the court declines to assume jurisdiction over the state of Arizona's criminal prosecution of Mr. Meadows. So friends, how might Mark Meadows' loss in federal court in Arizona impact Donald Trump's federal prosecution in Washington, D.C.? Well, recall that Judge Tanya Chutkan, who's presiding over Donald Trump's D.C. case, is about to litigate whether Donald Trump's crimes and conduct involved official governmental acts, official acts of a president for which he would be immune from prosecution, or does his conduct involve unofficial acts, private acts, acts of a candidate, not a president? Think about it. If the federal judge in Arizona just ruled that what Mark Meadows did, the things that he did with Donald Trump, at the direction of Donald Trump, for the benefit of Donald Trump in trying to overturn the election's results, if all of that was unofficial acts, not official governmental acts, duties, responsibility, well, then doesn't that suggest that what Donald Trump did together with Mark Meadows to try to overturn the election's results also constitutes unofficial acts, not the official governmental acts of a president, and therefore Donald Trump will not be immune from prosecution. And over the past 24 hours or so, a number of legal scholars have made that very point after seeing what Judge Tucci ruled out in Arizona in the Meadows case. For example, this from Ryan Goodman: federal court rejecting Mark Meadows' removal claim in Arizona signals how D.C. court will most likely reject Trump's immunity claim. This from Norm Eisen: big loss for former Trump White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows in Arizona, where he was trying to remove his state criminal case to federal court. Denied because his 2020 coup conduct was unofficial. Suggests Trump's coup activity in his D.C. criminal case was also unofficial and so not immune. No immunity for you, Donald, because justice matters. Friends, as always, please stay safe. Please stay tuned. And I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.